Well, is the United States preparing for a war in the Middle East, a broader regional war? Well, it sure as hell seems that way. We have warmongers like neocon Senator Lindsey Graham passing a bill to give power to the president to go to war in Iran, just in case he needs it. We're preemptively doing this homework for him. We're going to get these paperworks out there ahead of time. So will American families be okay sending their sons and daughters to fight and die for Israel or to fight a war with Iran? That's the question. So is the United States heading for a broader regional war? What are the larger implications of all of this? Someone whose sources are impeccable and who has been spot on since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, and of course what's been unfolding in the Middle East, is Colonel Douglas MacGregor. Colonel, great to have you back on the show. Great to see you.
Sure.
So are we headed, you see these moves in the Senate, you see these moves in the House of Representatives, preemptively giving the power to the president, you need to go to war with Iran. Here's the paperwork. We've done the homework for you. Do you think a broader regional war is unfolding, or is this just fluff?
Well, I think the potential for a broader regional war is very, very real. What most of your listeners probably don't understand, or maybe they do, I hope they do, is that people like Lindsey Graham are out there essentially dishing for money. He makes these ridiculous statements, and he and Blumenthal sit down and craft legislation to do what you described, which is essentially, if you want to go to war with Iran, we're all for you. We'll do whatever you like. That means big donors pour money into their political action committees and support structures. They have no accountability in the Senate. They're not in charge of anything. They're not responsible for the armed forces. So it's all nonsense. When there is no accountability, people will say and do all sorts of stupid things. And that goes on all the time in Washington on the Hill. None of those people have responsibility for anything that happens in a war. They just vote for it. They send money and they pay no attention, and then they posture. So let's set that aside for a minute. The problem we have right now is that I don't think we have anybody in the White House. What we have are people in the cabinet like Blinken and Austin and others, and Sullivan, of course, as the national security advisor. And then behind them are lots of people that nobody knows. Some of them are huge donors to the Democratic Party, to the left. Some of them are just self-appointed experts that hold appointed but unelected positions, and they are steering the ship of state in bad directions. We are not interested in going to war in the Middle East. We weren't interested in going to war in Eastern Europe. But that's what it looks like right now, just as it looked that way, last fall in Eastern Europe. We wondered whether or not we were going to see a massive intervention in Ukraine. Now we're wondering about what we're going to do. The truth is, we are even less prepared now and less capable now of taking on a regional war, particularly a war that would involve virtually everyone in the region against Israel and the United States. What you're seeing right now with the Iranian leadership just met with President Erdogan of Turkey. This is after their foreign ministers met. They held discussions. We obviously are not privileged to what those discussions were about, but we do have some speechifying by President Erdogan, who points out the world is appalled by what is happening in Gaza, and we have nothing but silence from the United States and its Western allies. What is wrong with this? Now, the Iranian leadership is headed to Riyadh, to Saudi Arabia. These are the major players in the region. One cannot help but conclude that we're watching an alliance coalesce between all of these powers against what is happening with Israel and us. Meanwhile, we're attacking what we say are Iranian-backed Shiite militias and other targets, Syria, Iraq, elsewhere in the Middle East, on the assumption that they all take orders from Iran, which is not really true. They're still independent. The Iraqi militias are nationalist organizations. They may be Shiite, but they're still nationalists, and they're acting on their own. But even then, the little pinprick attacks that they're launching against U.S. positions are just that. They're more signals and warnings than anything else. But they're trying to alert people to the possibility that this could all turn dramatically in a moment's notice into a major war launched against Israel and us. So we send a couple of carrier battle groups. We add some more people on the ground in Syria and in Iraq. We add some air defense units to try and protect our forces from air and missile strikes if they're launched against us. But we're not ready for this, Morris. We don't have the ammunition. We don't have the logistical support structure in place. Two carrier battle groups are supposedly there to deter. They're not going to deter anybody. They sit offshore in the ocean, very far from shore, because the closer they get to shore, the more danger they encounter. But we seem to think that this is sort of a battleship diplomacy. Either you stand down, or here are our new 21st century equivalents of battleships, even though it's a very old solution, carrier battle groups that we can launch 200, 300 cruise missiles. We can launch maybe 80, 90 aircraft at a stretch. But that's not going to win any wars. And the people ashore know that. And now they increasingly have reach and capability that didn't exist. I mean, the biggest problem that we don't seem to come to terms with, we didn't come to terms with it in Russia. We assumed that Russia was weak and incapable and could do nothing but respond to our demands. We got an education. You have a similar phenomenon in the region today of the Middle East. This is not 1973. This is 50 years later. All of these countries are more capable, both in terms of their populations that are better educated and more capable of acting decisively in uniform, but especially Turkey and Iran. These are nations of nearly 90 million people each. The Iranians have some of the best air and missile and space experts in the world. They put together an arsenal of missiles that could dramatically destroy Israel if launched. Then you have the Turks. They can put 2 million men into the field in a month, and they have an excellent army. They also have new missiles in their arsenals that could easily destroy Israel and actually attack our offshore naval power, just as the Iranians do. And the populations in the region are 100% behind them. In other words, we're dealing with an entire region of people that is enraged at what is happening in Gaza. They went from saying that what Hamas had done was ugly and inappropriate, they'd gone too far and committed these atrocious crimes, to a point where they're now watching over 10,000 dead in Gaza, including thousands of children and women and old men. All of this is reaching them through television, through mass media, and they are enraged that no one is willing to step in, particularly the United States, and say, that's enough. And normally, that's what presidents have done historically. They've intervened and said, all right, you regain control of the Suez. Now you want to cross the Suez Canal? Negative. You cannot cross the Suez Canal. If you cross the Suez Canal in 1973, that could put us in a warlike status with Russia. Russia will not tolerate the destruction of Egypt. So the Israelis eventually ceased and desisted, pulled back over the Suez, and eventually we got an agreement. No one is intervening right now. No one is saying, wait a minute, what are you doing? You're just carpet bombing Gaza. I mean, it's way beyond, well, we're targeting what we think is Hamas. They're absolutely flattening the place and killing large numbers of people in the process. But right now, Mr. Netanyahu has far more influence and authority in Washington than President Biden. And that's a fact.
A few weeks ago, you said this, and I think it was spot on then, and I think we're seeing it unfold now. You said, quote, "You have an understandable and justified interest from Israel to destroy Hamas. However, I think the current plan will provoke an enormous reaction from the Muslim world. Pretty much everyone from Indonesia to Morocco is going to be extremely upset, and I think we will see the front against Israel in the region coalesce into a real military alliance against Israel. We need to protect Israel from itself, but you can," end quote. But you can only, I think, lead a horse to water. And I think the frustration I've been seeing from a number of supporters of Israel is Netanyahu has now screwed himself, that they've gone a bridge too far. And this is now going to lead to the destruction of Israel by carrying out what is unfolded in Gaza. Going after Hamas, fine. Thousands of children being killed, not fine. The displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, not fine. There's secret plans drawn up to send 500,000 Palestinians to Canada, the Trudeau government. Well, 500,000 to Ireland, to the United Kingdom. I'm sure the Biden administration is making plans right now to have New York filled with Palestinians. So I think you were right about this. Have we failed to protect Israel from itself?
Oh, absolutely. No one is intervening to do that. On the contrary, I would compare this to the so called blank check that was issued by the Kaiser to Vienna regarding the invasion of Serbia. That was really what sparked the second or the First World War. We've given Netanyahu a blank check and said, by all means, go for it. Now, there are people in Washington inside the White House who are afraid. What they've done is effectively opened the cage door and released the tiger. And the tiger doesn't want to get back in the cage. The tiger wants to finish off everybody in the neighborhood. The tiger is Netanyahu, and he has concluded this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. We have enormous control and influence over the United States, over its armed forces, its military power, its economic power, because the Israeli economy is being destroyed. Israel's in bad shape economically as a result of this war, but we can compensate for that. How do we compensate? We send billions of dollars over there to keep Israel afloat. So he says this is the perfect time for us to settle accounts. We'll wipe everybody out. And there's a certain amount of arrogance assuming that no one in the region can act against us. And if they do, well, we have the United States. Of course, no one bothered to ask, is it in the interest of the United States to be drawn into a regional war that would involve the Turks, the Iranians, as well as all of the Arab states? I don't think it is. But when you bring that up, people scoff and say, oh, that could never happen. The Shiites hate the Sunnis. The Turks and the Iranians will never cooperate. The Arabs have always been poor at organizing and cooperating. Egypt has nowhere else to go. They need us. They're not going to abandon us. And frankly speaking, the keystone in the edifice of peace in the region is really Egypt. Egypt has maintained an excellent set of relations with Israel for 50 years. If Egypt defects, and that's not impossible because right now in the streets in Cairo, my contacts over there tell me that people are saying that Sisi is a tool of Israel, that he's somehow or another either an American or an Israeli puppet. Well, that's bad news for Mr. Sisi, the general, if he wants to stay in charge. And remember, the Muslim Brotherhood took over in Egypt under Obama. He went there and congratulated Mr. Morsi was the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, they were thrown out by a coup, and we all welcomed that because we were worried what that meant for Egypt. Well, remember that Hamas is an armed wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. Remember that Mr. Erdogan is the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood in the Middle East and in North America. All of these things begin to fall together, the pieces. And you have this understanding in Iran and Turkey that while they don't like each other and they disagree on things, they're not going to go to war with each other because they understand how pointless and destructive that is. But when it comes to Israel, they can agree. They don't like it. They don't think it should exist. And they're fed up and they're disgusted because we have failed to exercise restraint. We haven't restrained the Israelis. And you're not going to see anything happen in Washington. Everyone is
they're all bought and sold. It seems like they've got some dirt on like every member of Congress or something. They really seem to be in the tank no matter what the cost for Israel.
Well, remember the lobby, and Professor Mearsheimer and his colleague wrote a book, Waltz, about the Israel lobby. And one of the things that people don't understand is that lobby, and they're not the only ones, by the way. There are other lobbies that operate this way. The pharmaceutical lobbies do business this way. The defense lobbies are similar. We want to support you, Congressman so-and-so, Senator so-and-so. We'd like to give you this money that will go into your political action committee to help reelect you. But if you're not going to support us, well, we'll just go over here to your opponent and he'll get all the money. And so you're in a tough position sitting on the Hill. Everyone worries in Congress all the time about reelection. Senators are there for 6 years. It's a different kettle of fish. But if you're only there for 2 years, you spend probably 50% of your time or more trying to beef up your reelection campaign because the next thing you know, it's reelection time. So they never really stop campaigning and they never really stop hunting for money. It's a terrible system. It doesn't work. That's why it's all back to the chief executive. Where is the chief executive? What's his vision? There is no vision. There is nothing from the White House. It's empty. And I know that the NSC staff and the National Security Advisor, they are very afraid. They have a tiger wandering through the neighborhood and they can't get it back into the cage because the tiger controls them. It's sort of wag the dog. We're the
Right.
dog. We're being wagged. The
Mhm.
dog is not in charge of his tail.
I want to talk about the double standards and the hypocrisy here. We heard from the State Department, we heard from the Pentagon, of course, after the special military operation into what was Eastern Ukraine, which is now Russia. And of course, to any of us who've been following what's been unfolding there since 2014, by all accounts, it was a genocide. The constant shelling of Donetsk, of the Donbass region since 2014. Thousands, tens of thousands of people killed, innocent people, residential buildings, playgrounds, etc. But the rest of the world was seemingly silent on that. Then Russia invades, and suddenly now it's Putin's genocide. And innocent people being killed, and the world needs to rally around and stop the evil Mr. Putin. Okay, so that was the narrative that was floating around out there, of course. And we try to shed light on the truth of this. Yes, innocent people have been killed, but it's not that narrative, and certainly not in those terms. But now we see tens of thousands of people being killed in Gaza. We know what happened on October 7th. We know the Hamas attacks. When you hear the State Department being asked direct questions, or the Pentagon yesterday or over the past few days being asked direct questions about how they judge genocide, like what metrics are you using here in the State Department and the Pentagon to judge when a country is carrying out genocide? It seems to be a double standard, but maybe I'm reading this wrong. What's your take on this?
Well, there is a definition for it. The UN has one. And I encourage people to look it up and read it, and then they can make up their own minds. I don't like the word genocide, frankly. I think you can make an argument that the Japanese in World War II, in many cases, waged what was probably genocidal warfare in China, killing millions of Chinese. We can be accused of waging a genocidal campaign against Japan, ultimately firebombing their cities and then delivering an atom bomb on two cities. Was genocide. I normally think of genocide as something that happened to the Jews. 6 million people are systematically murdered. To me, that's genocide. I don't like the word, but what I really don't like is as you point out, is a double standard. There is this attitude that whatever we do is always good and whatever everybody else does is always bad. We never step up and admit that, we flattened Dresden and Leipzig towards the end of the war when there was no reason to bomb anybody. We did a lot of things that were destructive and ultimately criminal during World War II, but then everybody did. The Soviets were probably the worst offenders, murdering millions of people as they advanced, including their own citizens. So I don't think it's something that's going to solve itself. I don't go down that road and debate it. I simply think that we need to end the fighting. Israel itself is at high risk in my judgment. If we want Israel to survive, it is now in our interest and in Israel's interest for this to halt, this killing in Gaza. If this goes on for another month, what we've been talking about, this slow but steady coalescing of forces in the region, that will reach a point where finally everyone says, that's it, no more, we're attacking. We have a holy obligation to the Muslim Arabs in Gaza and on the West Bank. They've all been through too much. We will attack. That's where we ought to focus right now. That's why we need to stop this thing. And there are Israelis that understand this. It's a slim majority at the moment that backs Netanyahu and what he wants to do, because everyone is emoting. They want revenge, revenge, revenge. They also think that they have to restore what they call deterrence. That is, if you kill any of us, all hell will visit you. You will pay an enormous price if you do this to us. The problem is that deterrence in that form is not going to be restored. The Muslims are no longer afraid as they were 50 years ago. They are stronger. They are more conscious of themselves. They're willing to fight. They are not afraid of us. Sending carrier battle groups, like sending battleships, doesn't frighten them anymore. They have the ability to protect themselves and to do enormous damage to us in Israel. They know it. We have to find a different way forward other than threatening and bullying people. That's true for us. It's true for Israel. No one is thinking like that in Washington, but that's what's needed. That's where you get good diplomacy. That's where you have some sort of sense of limitations. When you and I started talking about Ukraine, the biggest problem that we were facing in Ukraine from the very beginning was We thought our power was limitless, that we could do anything, that no one could stand against us. And we discovered we were dead wrong. Our resources are very limited. When you fight 7,000 miles away from home, you are limited. Well, we're limited in the Middle East, just as we were limited in Eastern Europe. We cannot do everything everywhere all the time with impunity. But no one wants to stand up and admit that there are limitations to our interests. There are.
I'll get you out of here on this, Colonel, which is what happens next in Gaza. And we heard from Benjamin Netanyahu in an interview this past week saying that they will basically control Gaza indefinitely. They will govern Gaza indefinitely. The United States says that's not a good idea. But again, you point out no one in Washington is doing anything or pulling any kind of strings at all. They're sort of puppets there of Israel right now. So with 70% of Gaza's population fleeing their homes, Israel says the massive tunnel network of Hamas has been, I think, almost more than half destroyed, so they say. So maybe this could be winding down. They will then control Gaza. If you're advising the President of the United States, what do you tell the President of the United States? To allow Israel to control Gaza or to get out and create a two-state solution? I mean, this is a big question, of course. It's not an easy answer. But what would you advise the President?
Well, first of all, if what you say is true, it may or may not be. This could last another month or more. Remember the Warsaw Uprising that involved 27,000, 30,000 Polish fighters against the Germans between 1 August and 1 October 1944. That was 60 days. Took the Germans 60 days to defeat them, kill large numbers of them. Then they completely flattened Warsaw and drove out the population. So that took 2 months. I'm not sure that the Israelis are as far along as they want to be. They probably had some success, but they haven't penetrated thus far the urban center. That's still to be done. I don't know how long that will take. But if we can't introduce some sort of third or fourth actor into the equation, if we can't turn to others and say, would you be willing to come in here and provide some sort of cover along the lines of what we created after the 73 war, which was a Sinai peacekeeping force, then I think the Israelis are going to take control of it and things will not improve. They will get worse because the Arab population is certainly not going to be happy to be policed in its streets and in its homes by the Israeli Defense Force. That's simply putting them in the same box that the people on the West Bank are in right now. And we in the West are not getting any news about what's happening on the West Bank. The Israelis are running raids there into various towns and cities. They're being accompanied by soldiers and settlers. Palestinian Arabs are being arrested on the slimmest of or the thinnest of evidence. They're trying to keep a lid on what they fear could be a double uprising. In other words, an intifada in the West Bank while they're still fighting in Gaza. None of this is a solution. If the Israelis insist on holding on to and occupying Gaza, they better do it when there's no one there. In other words, when all the Arabs have been driven out. And I still think that is the goal for the Israelis at this point. They want to drive that population out, and it becomes someone else's problem, not theirs. Now, in defense, we should keep something in mind. During the Camp David Accords, Menachem Begin tried to give Gaza to Sadat in Egypt. And Sadat said, you've got to be kidding. That's too much trouble. We can't handle it. Right. We have our own problems inside Egypt. We move them into Sinai. How is that going to solve the problem? Because if you moved 2 million Arabs from where they are now into Sinai and built new settlements, do you really think that those Arabs are going to walk away from the country that they formerly lived in for 1,000 years and simply say, we're happy now? In other words, you're moving the problem a short distance. You're not solving the problem. And the solution evades everyone because even now, the two-state solution, I don't know how you get one at this point.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think the Israelis will tolerate it. I think the Israelis regard anything on their border that they don't control as a potential criminal enterprise that has to be crushed. So I guess this thing has to burn itself out one way or the other. But right now, I think Mr. Netanyahu is doing exactly what we discussed. He's exploiting the opportunity that he thinks is almost a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to crush Israel's enemies. I hope that they do it quickly. if they're going to do it. If this lasts another 30 days, I think all bets are off. The worst case scenario is eminently possible. I just hope we can put it off for another 30 days. I'm not sure that will work.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And again, remember, we speak from the standpoint of we're not with the Arabs. We want Israel to survive. I think Israel as an entity is an inherently good thing. It is very productive and very a positive member of the larger international community, but that's not the view in the region. Israel has no friends in the region. And if they had anybody that was willing to do business with them before, they have no one now.
Yeah, dark days ahead. And we'll watch over the next 30 days and we'll see how much control they have over Gaza over the next, you're seeing videos of tens of thousands of people being marched out of there. Where will they go? Where will they come back to? And who will govern? That is the greater questions over the next few weeks. Colonel Douglas MacGregor, great seeing you. Thanks as always for your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Morris.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.